What's up, ladies and gentlemen of YouTube? Boogie2988 coming at you live again through the power of the internet. And forgive me, I'm being extra quiet, but I'm going to try to leave the obnoxiousness, the gallows humor, and everything else out of this video so that we can actually pay some actual respects to where I currently am. This is the National Museum of Funeral History. I don't really know what to expect, but my friend Jacob the carpetbagger said this is a really great place to visit, so let's try to show it some respect and see what all they have. Now this is absolutely fascinating. This is a casket built for 3 people. 2 parents and their child. Apparently it was built in preparation for the child's death, and the parents were going to willingly join them. The father was supposed to take care of the mother and then take care of himself, and they would all be buried together. Now the story has it, the reason this is here is because it was never used for that purpose. Instead, they backed out, and this casket thankfully ended up getting unused, but that is a heartbreaking story. On a much lighter note, here is a casket known as the money casket, and the point of this casket was actually to show off a patented technique of creating a casket that has things embedded in it. So this one also was ever actually used, but it was used as a display unit to show off that patented technique to get funeral homes, buyers, and customers interested in it. All joking aside, I'm dead serious about this. Dead serious, I should say. I would like this. I probably will get cremated when the time comes, but I think it would be fascinating to have this done with Magic the Gathering cards. It would be the nerdiest funeral of all time. Now, my dad was a serviceman, so we all know that servicemen, their funerals are treated a little bit differently, as they should be, I agree. But a lot of people don't really realize that first responders get that same honor or a similar honor, as they should as well. These are the people that save lives, so when their lives passes, I think it's awesome that we make something special out of those funerals as well. Unfortunately, at one point or another, we'll probably all be behind a hearse, but it's interesting to see the hearses throughout history, starting with this one, a 1900s railway baggage cart, which could be used. And a nice, massive hearse like this one, this Lascelles from 1939. That one just says funeral coach right there near the dashboard. This is a 1951 Cadillac Superior. The funeral coach written on it, 1935 Studebaker. 1940 Lascelles Touring Sedan. Here is some horse-drawn carriages. It's interesting because if you're a Disney fan like me, if you've ever been to Disneyland, if you've ever been to the Haunted Mansion, you'll see some very similar to these. And they do become, you know, a little less elaborate in the back to much more elaborate here in the front, but they're really something to see. Now, in almost every culture, obviously a funeral is a sad affair, but some cultures, instead of focusing on mourning the passing of a life, they choose to celebrate that life existed at all. And I think that's kind of amazing. I wish we did more of that. Obviously, it's sad when we lose somebody we love, and it's sad for them as well. But taking the time to recognize that we get to share our lives with them, get to spend time with them, I think that's an important way to do it. And the way they do it in New Orleans is fascinating. I've never seen a funeral procession like this with the drums and the horns and everything else, but it's got to beat the funerals I've been to, for sure. In this small section here, they recognize some of the lives of celebrities that have passed and some of the items that they owned. Here is a violin, or should I say fiddle, owned by Charlie Daniels. A large variety of memorabilia in relation to some celebrity names that you might recognize. But I thought this one was particularly interesting Arch West, who, for all intents and purposes, is the reason you've eaten a Dorito. If it wasn't for Arch West, you would have never gotten that chance, and it's fascinating to see this bag of Doritos here to commemorate it. Kermit the Frog caught my eye here, and I stopped to read this little placard about Jim Henson. But here's something I didn't know about Jim. Besides the Muppet Show and all the other things he worked on, I didn't know that later in life he worked on helping create the TV show Dinosaurs, which was a 90s hit. Boy, I think very few of my audience are going to recognize this giant gentleman here. But Al Lewis, who most famously, I think, played the grandfather on the Munsters. But I do remember him from Car 54, Where Are You? On old school Nick at Night reruns as well. The dude had been acting his whole life, did a really amazing and memorable job. Next to him, over here is the man who still doesn't get any respect. Of course, the Rodney Dangerfield. Took a minute to even turn on the camera for this one. These are actual hiking boots worn by Robin Williams in the 2006 movie RV. Not much to say. I just, it's amazing to see that here. On a slightly lighter note, if you're a big fan of Disney, you're a big fan of Snow White, here is a replica of the coffin that Snow White slept in that movie. Here's a small section that they're calling Gone Too Soon, the 27 Club. And when you look at these names, whether it's Amy Winehouse, Janis Joplin, Kurt Cobain, so many incredible musicians, singers, actors, so much talent gone so quickly. This Wendy's meal caught my eye as they have a program from Dave Thomas's funeral, but also here in the back, the man, the myth himself, Billy Mays, a bag of OxyClean as a way to remember him. Now, in previous travel videos, I've talked a little bit about George Barris, who made the Toys R Us car at the Celebrity Car Museum I was at recently. Well, this custom casket was made for George Barris, which is very fitting to the man, the myth, the legend, the car creator. It's a beautiful thing to see, it really is. In this hallway, we see a shrine to how people have mourned throughout the years, whether it's a mourning blanket like this, or these types of dresses that widows would wear. Some more garbs and memorabilia that you would wear as a way to show that you are in mourning. And even this, for the funeral procession, the widow's carriage, which presumably would be the way that the widow would make it to the funeral. My grandparents had a photo like this hanging in their house. I don't know who it was of, but it's saying here that these are often made as a in memorandum of someone who has passed. So probably could have been my dad's parents or my grandmother's parents. But by the time I was an adult, old enough to recognize that this was a real thing, I think it was long gone. Something else you don't think about is how great medical science is these days and what our life expectancy becomes, but that wasn't always the case. Sometimes someone younger would pass away and smaller caskets had to be made. So thankfully we live in a world where that kind of thing happens way less often. So this display is meant to replicate a parlor that you would find in a 19th century home. And they go on to explain that funeral homes were definitely a thing, but more often than not, the deceased would be taken to their home and placed in the parlor for up to 3 days, where family and friends could come and visit and see the deceased before they were put in their final resting place. Another thing that people really don't like to think about is what happens to your body after you have deceased. And if you don't choose cremation, chances are you are going to be embalmed. And that's a process that can be very unpleasant to think about. When you look at the tools that have been used throughout history to perform that, it is certainly a depressing thing. Nobody wants to think about this happening to them, but it's something that comes to us all at some point. I think I would definitely rather just be cremated. Another thing I never really think about too much is, what would I be buried in if I chose to be buried, right? Like a gamer t-shirt and a pair of sweatpants that I wear every day. You know, I've helped choose and have chosen outfits for loved ones in the past. I don't know what I would choose for myself if it ever came to that. Stepping back even further in time, forget the 19th century. We're talking Wild West days. And if you passed out there, the same things still had to happen. Sometimes you would be shipped back east. Sometimes you would be buried there, but regardless, the process still had to take place. And when you think about embalming, you got to think about who really pioneered that. And that would be the ancient Egyptians. Of course, we've all seen the pyramids, and that is one of many ways to remember the people who had passed, similar to how do we do now, just in a much more grandiose method. But seeing some of these artifacts and replicas, here's the process itself. And I'm glad that they went with a much more cartoony mummy than what would be realistic. I laughed a little bit and when I saw it, but that seems way better than being horrified. So far, we've taken a pretty good look at American culture and how we treat funerals. But not every nation is going to be the same in that regard, and it's nice to see that other nations get a spot here. In the United States, obviously, we have Halloween, but a much different holiday is the Day of the Dead, whether people are dressing up in costumes, trying to speak with spirits for their ancestors, or just memorizing and remembering them from the past with shrines like this one. I think that's really fascinating. I feel like in the United States, we don't do enough remembering the people that we loved. And this is a good way to do it. And we have seen some of these coffins at various Ripley's, believe it or not, when we've gone to them before. But this is a really interesting way to celebrate a life. And I know people make jokes about it. I've made jokes about it in the past, but honestly, what an amazing way to remember the person you were, the things that you did, the things that you accomplished, the things that you loved in your life, than having one of these really awesome custom caskets built the way they do in some places in the world. And when a king passes away, you would definitely expect something grandiose. When a president passes away here, we definitely go above and beyond as well. So this is a replica of the hearse of Louis the 18th. Now, very interesting to go from kings to popes, but here is an example of what a pope's funeral setup might look like. I'm not going to say a lot here. I don't want to be disrespectful, but it is certainly grandiose. Going back a few years, you'd see that it hasn't changed too much. The outfits, the technology. But when a pope passes, you'd expect it to be pretty much the same, keeping with tradition. I mean, based on the throne they sit on, the outfits they wear, they don't always wear the same thing. They don't all always sit on the same throne. Well, every pope is different, but they certainly are coming across as very important people. I can't think of anything more depressing than a Christmas time funeral. But this is fascinating. This is a late 1800s horse-drawn sleigh. In case you needed to have a funeral procession in the snow. Now going back to the previous room, we talked about a president's funeral. And this is an exact replica of the mahogany casket used for the passing of John F. Kennedy. Obviously, we're down in Texas, so he is going to always be remembered here. And it, honestly, for a president's casket, I have to say it's humble. I really respect that. Likewise, here's the mahogany casket used for President Ronald Reagan. Likewise, very, very humble. I'm beginning to notice a theme. This is really fascinating and a piece of American history. It is a book that was confidential for the United States Secret Service's eyes only, never meant to be seen by civilians. And in it, it details the events of the assassination of President Lincoln, the search for John Wilkes Booth, and the carefully guarded truth that Booth was not found and executed as that was believed by the public. So I'm learning that now for the first time. That events didn't take place the way they taught me in history class. And this isn't the original one, but this is a replica of Lincoln's death mask. I'm gonna get a good idea of what he really looked like outside of photographs. Back in the day, this would be one of the only ways to really do that. Now, you could have a portrait made, but it never would be 3D, but a death mask or casting like this before you passed would be an excellent way to do it. And when you did pass, this would be the last chance to ever have that made. Wow. This is a replica of what Lincoln would have looked like in the casket that they sent him off in. They even put him on display for parts of the country to see. And that's actually really fascinating. It's like walking back in time. Lincoln's body was taken by train, and here's a replica of that train. And of course, on a horse buggy as well. And this is a replica of the carriage that would have taken him around the country, as well as to his, probably his final resting place. For 20 days, Lincoln was brought around the country so that people could pay their respects using this setup. And I think that's really fascinating for the man who saved the Union. So here behind me is footage from the funeral of George Bush Sr., Barbara Bush as well. Native Texans. People really love the Bushes down here. And I will tell you that I didn't show you everything in this museum because I wanted to pay as much respects and be as quiet as I could for the other people who are visiting this museum. You never know what feelings and emotions that they are experiencing, and I don't want to distract from that or take away from that. So if you decide to visit here for yourself, there's plenty more to see that I didn't show you. That said, I think with Lincoln and George Bush, it's a wonderful place to live off. It really has me thinking about how lucky we are to be here, how lucky we are to celebrate our lives, how lucky we are to share those lives together, and how grateful I am that you chose to take a few minutes to share my life with you. So guys, as always, thanks for watching. I love you very much, and I'll speak with you again soon. Go live your life while you can. This day's coming eventually. You're gonna be all right.